Welcome to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life, with psychologist and author of over 75 books, Dr. Barry Weinhold.
Welcome back, everyone, to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life with Dr. Barry Weinhold. My name is Ashley Ross. Dr. Weinhold, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a lovely day. You can see from the background from the sun shining. And, I'm just great. I feel great to be alive.
That is a great day. And any day the sun's out is definitely appreciated, especially as we're getting further into these later year months. And sometimes they're not as frequent. So I would agree. It's always nice when the sun shines, and it makes me feel better. That's for sure.
Yeah, me too. I couldn't live in Seattle where the sun shines so few days a year. We get here in Colorado, we get somewhere between 300 330 days of sunshine every year.
Wow, that's way more than we get here.
So,
we're not as bad as Seattle, though.
Yeah.
My friend tried to convince me to move there once, but I said, "There's no way."
No, I couldn't make it. I would be constantly depressed by the lack of sunshine.
Definitely. So
and also,
last week,
I'm up at 6,500 feet here.
Wow, yeah, that's true too.
The sun is pretty powerful at this altitude. And actually, interestingly, in India, all the gurus, all the holy people, go up to northern India, where a lot of them reside. Hundreds of them reside in a place called the Kulu Valley. And the altitude of the Kulu Valley is about 6,500 feet. And they believe that it's easier to be spiritual at that altitude.
Well, I would agree based on how much vitamin D you get at that point.
I have a suntan all year round.
I was going to say, I feel like that would be very, very good seller of sunscreen in your neck of the woods, most likely. Yeah, that's great. So last week you talked about introducing us to some of these family patterns, and you mentioned this week we're going to get into 12 addictive family patterns. So can you kind of walk us through what these addictive family patterns are and help us start identifying them?
Yeah, well, I want to back up just a step. I didn't finish this. I should have.
Oh, sure.
About the book. And
of course.
I wrote this book. Yeah, this is the current version of it. It's gone through 6 different titles and 6 different publishers, or not, but editions, I guess I'd call them. And the first one was a book that I wrote myself and self-published called Just Breaking Family Patterns. And then I was in Washington at a conference, and I was sitting next to this woman, and she said, I introduced myself, and she introduced herself as the publisher of a publishing company. So, not to be too shy, I said, well, I have this book called Breaking Family Patterns that I've been looking for a publisher for. Would you be interested? She said, send me a copy. So I did. And long story short, she published it. And they thought it would be a clever title to call it, what was it? Playing Grown Up is Serious Business. Now, how they came up with that, I don't know, but it never sold. the title was too enigmatic that people didn't understand it. And so then they changed it back to uh, changing addictive family relationships or something like that. And then it went through another edition, and eventually the company went out of business, and so I bought back the rights to it. And then I had published it under two books. One of identifying family patterns was book one, and then changing family patterns was book two. So then this edition came to mind is let's put it all back into one book. So it's breaking free, identifying, and changing your addictive family patterns. So that's the history of the book. I kind of like the current version of it, and in terms of putting it all back into one book. So
I think that can be helpful for people to have a linear path, you
yeah,
know.
the first edition of the book, I think I published myself in about 1990, 1989 or 90, somewhere in there. And then Still Point was the publisher of the first published version by a company. So anyway, yeah, I want to talk about these patterns that I've studied them now since, well, back in the 80s and 90s, and the work that I did in studying them has always helped me understand how much of these patterns persist in our lives. I have an example of which I thought after I finished last week's episode is in my family. The family pattern is that the oldest, or the not necessarily the oldest, but the daughter is the one that has to take care of the parents, and it's in both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side. My grandmother took care of my great grandmother, and she lived to be 103, and then my grandmother. I never met my great grandmother on my mother's side. She had died before I was born. But then we ended up taking care of her. She actually, we had a double house, a duplex, and my dad fixed it up so that she lived on one side, we lived on the other, and there was a door in between that was open and closed, so we could have access back and forth. And then my sister ended up taking care of my mother and my father before they died. And so I'm sure she probably is grooming her daughter to take care of her when she's older and can't take care of herself anymore, because her daughter still lives nearby, down the street from where she lives, I think. Anyway, it's a family pattern that I'm become aware of. And actually, I felt sorry for my sister, that she had to really sacrifice a lot to take care of both my parents in their old age. And she only lived a block away. And so it was very convenient for her to be the one to take care of them. And she did a marvelous job, but it was a lot of responsibility. So I don't know, talking about the patterns, let's put them up on the screen and then I'll go through each one of them. Yeah. And so I've divided this up into three general patterns with three sub-patterns under each. So let's talk about the general pattern of the reappearance of unresolved parental traits. These are unresolved issues with parents that show up in your adult relationships. So whatever you didn't resolve with either your mother or your father is likely going to show up again in your relationship with your wife or your husband, or in any kind of close relationship. And so it's inevitable, and people don't realize this is going to happen. And so it sometimes catches them by surprise when suddenly they see their spouse a lot like they did their father or their mother. And this is where projections come in, because we tend to then project on our spouses whatever issues we didn't get resolved with our either parent. And so it's unfair to them, and they don't know what's happening. I mean, so many couples I've talked to in therapy, they say, "Gee, when we got together, we were so close, and we uh, agreed on everything, and now we can't agree on the time of day. Why?" Well, it's because of the projections of the unresolved issues from whatever in childhood that you never got finished. And so it's unfinished business, and the natural learning style of human beings is anything that's unfinished will continue to repeat. And then the other part of that that's really sometimes very discouraging to couples is that the closer they get, the safer the relationship gets, and the more likely these patterns will show up. So it's like the good news and bad news. We got close, but now we got these patterns to deal with. And do you have any? You're shaking your head, so you understand what I'm talking about. Do you have any examples from your side that you want to share?
Yeah. I don't know if I have specific examples, but most recently, I've started seeing those patterns emerge of the way my mother acted and the cues that I remember, and like the ways that I remember her acting that obviously I saved in my memory bank. And having those come up when it comes to the relationship with my husband. And obviously, like you say, awareness is a good place to start. And so I've been working on now that I have the awareness, at least verbalizing them to my husband so that he can better understand like why I was acting that way, and that I'm trying to find a new way to act.
Yeah. Well, that's important to be able to share that. And I mean, that's the first step in taking back a projection, is recognizing that I'm projecting an unresolved issue from my childhood on my spouse, and to acknowledge that, and then to maybe even elicit some support and help to reclaim that projection, and begin to work on whatever is unresolved or unfinished about it in your present life. I always see those as opportunities. Not all couples see it that way when it happens, though. But if you're really conscious about why that's happening, you say, "Oh, my memory bank is now giving me another opportunity to resolve this." Well, thank you, memory bank. But hardly ever anybody that I know of looks at it that way. But that's the best way, in my book, to look at when these unresolved parental traits show up in our spouses, or even they can even show up in our children. So it's not just spouses. And then the specific patterns under that is the parental disapproval, like any prejudices or judgments that we heard our parents using on themselves or others. We tend to then use them again on ourselves and others without thinking about it. And so look at your prejudices or judgments about others, and think about, where did that come from? Where did you ever hear that prejudice spoken or that judgment made? And likely you'll find it happened while you were a child sometime. So that's a pattern that, and I have actually a self assessment tool about that. So if we can just, I don't know if you can put that up on the screen. Well, we can look at it and see where how to use that. It's very easy. There. That's not the one. The one about parental disapproval. Do you have one like that? There we are. So it just says, make 2 lists, one for your mother and your father, and with at least 5 things that each of them you knew disapproved about. Disapproved about you as a child. So make it personal. You can make it general if you want. And then looking at how many of those you now use to disapprove of yourself or others. And so that one should be available for the audience to download if they want. Okay, back to the list. The second one is getting even. And this is where people hold grudges. And if we saw our parents holding grudges about certain characteristics in people, it's a little bit like the judgments and prejudices, but it's really like trying to get revenge for whatever happened to us as a child on other people that we now do. And that pattern shows up sometimes in adulthood. And people, you wonder sometimes why people, I mean, you can even carry this out to a national level. Why is there such revenge motivation and behavior between the Israelis and the Arabs in Jerusalem or in Israel? And well, obviously, those are not only family patterns, but they become collective patterns of revenge. And so every time somebody does the Arabs do something on the West Bank or something, then the Israelis have to retaliate with something in the what is it called, the Strip, Gaza Strip. And so it's just a pattern of trying to get even, and it's actually in the Bible. I mean, they talk about the talionic response, which is, if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. And that's the natural kind of human response to anytime we feel hurt. And yet it doesn't lead to anything except more responses like it. It just feeds on each other. And then the third pattern is that, and I call this shame, that if we were punished for certain things growing up, and we may look at those as things that are bad about ourselves, and we condemn ourselves. And shame is really about a belief that there's something wrong with us. Now, we weren't born with that. That happened as a result of our experiences growing up. So look at yourself, and if there's anything that you feel like that you do things because there's something wrong with you, that's shame. And you likely got that early on growing up. I mean, how many of you, maybe you heard it, I heard it, shame on you. And that's pretty direct, but even punishing you for things that you thought were natural and pretty much what humans would do or what children would do, and you got punished for it, that often leads to feeling that there's something wrong with us. General pattern 2 is an instant replay of codependent, counterdependent family relationship patterns. And this is where the lack of secure bonding and failure to create an authentic self, which I've talked a lot about, shows up. And whatever the patterns are, that how we compensate for not having secure bonding. And if you remember, only about a half of infants leave infancy with secure bonding. So it's a big problem. And then only about 5% create an authentic self by the time they're 2 or 3. So one of the ways that people deal with that is they learn that if they act weak and helpless, they can get someone to take care of them. And so that's a pattern that shows up. And sometimes children will do that. They'll, if they need attention, they'll get sick. And that's a way in which they're trying to get their needs met in an indirect way. And then in pattern 2, people develop a belief that life is a struggle. And they believe that, whatever's bad happens to them. And they don't feel in charge of their life. They feel like their life is certainly not anything that they can make happen. It's something that just happens to them. And then the third one is sexual repression. This one I kind of see as a kind of a very difficult one sometimes to uncover, because sometimes there was unintentional sexual abuse. That it's often in the way our parents acted towards us regarding their own sexuality, and not that they were intentionally sexually abusive, but they may have also been flirtatious They may have walked around in their underwear, and this might have been something that that maybe in their family they did, and so it was like, uh, and it's a whole. I have a whole chapter in the book about this one, and even there's even a self-assessment quiz about to know whether you had unintentional sexual abuse in your childhood. And sometimes this is a subtle issue that people have a hard time really getting a handle on. But the book is very explicit about what is intentional and what is unintentional, but it's all sexual abuse. And then the third pattern is about living out your parents' relationship. And this is one I found that I was imitating the model that my parents had in their marriage, in my marriage. And when I saw that, it just really, really upset me because I had no idea I was doing that. I thought I was choosing to, have my marriage be exactly the way I wanted it to be. And so then there are a couple of sub patterns under that are important. Is that in some families, a child, often the oldest child, I was the oldest, they get what is called parentized, that you begin to take more care of your parents instead of taking care of yourself. And your focus is on helping them uh, to meet their needs. And it's like daddy's little girl or mama's little helper, or those kind of behaviors start to creep in. And the child, it really robs children of their childhood. They grow up too fast. I grew up too fast. I had to somehow reclaim my childhood as an adult, which was actually pretty much fun when I learned how to do it. I still do a lot of playing. I'm still a kid at heart, and I kind of like that idea. So I've made it, instead of a negative kind of thing, I've turned it into a fun kind of thing. It's positive. And then I'm interested in some cases we learn from watching our parents' relationship that they had a fear of success, and and then they also pass that on to their children. An example of that, of a couple who were coming. We were selling our house by owner, and we had this couple come to look at our house, and they loved the house, and they could even show. They even went around and said, "Oh, in this room, this piece of furniture we have will fit here and here and here." I mean, they were totally ready to buy the house, and then they had their parents come and look at it, and then we called them back after their parents looked at it, and they said, "Well, we've decided not to buy the house." And I said, "Well, why?" He said, "Our parents didn't like it." And it turned out that it was a much bigger house and a more expensive house than their parents lived in. And so the parents could not abide to have their children live in some house that was more expensive and bigger than the one they lived in. And so they talked them out of it. And so that's again an example of the fear of success. And then the last one we all deal with, crossing the threshold. I use Joseph Campbell's term on that one, is that the fear of taking risks. We get addicted to our comfort zone, and we don't take any risks in terms of how we live our lives, and we end up living a life of what I think Carl Jung said, life of quiet desperation, that we just don't ever, we become an observer of life. We watch other people taking risks and doing fun things, but we don't give ourselves permission to do that. And that's a fear of the unknown, a fear of somehow, if I do this and I fail, it'll be awful. And so it really gets to be a difficult situation. So those are the 12 main patterns. I mean, there's even others under these that I could look at, but I decided to stop at 12 and focus on these. So next time, what I'm going to hope to do is show you how, if you can identify these. And actually, there are two more instruments that I have on, and put those up so that the people know what they. This one is one to identify your traits. That's the first pattern, the main pattern, and that's available for download. And this one is the intergenerational relationship patterns that you could do, and identifying that in your own relationship. So I encourage you to download those and do a little writing about them, about how that might apply in your life. So next time we'll see if we can talk to people about how to change those patterns.
I'm very excited because I identified a few for myself already. So I'm ready for the next step.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weinhold. Until then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information, please visit the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership at CICRCL.org or click the link in the show notes.